When Catherine Marshall inherited her grandmother's dilapidated farmhouse in rural Montana, everyone told her to sell the land and forget about the crumbling structure. But what began as a simple demolition uncovered a secret that had been buried for over 7 decades, one that would change not only Catherine's life, but rewrite a forgotten chapter of American history. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the overgrown fields as Catherine Marshall stood on the gravel driveway, staring at what remained of her grandmother's farmhouse. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving behind weathered gray boards that creaked and moaned with every passing breeze. 2 of the windows were completely shattered, while the others were covered in decades of grime so thick you couldn't see through them. The roof sagged dangerously in the middle, threatening to collapse entirely during the next heavy snowfall. Catherine sighed, running her hand through her auburn hair as she tried to reconcile this decaying structure with the warm, vibrant home from her childhood memories. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Catherine had moved to Seattle 15 years ago, chasing dreams of becoming an architect. She'd succeeded too, building a respectable career designing sustainable commercial spaces for a prestigious firm. But when her grandmother Martha passed away 3 months ago at the age of 97, leaving Catherine the farmhouse and the surrounding 20 acres, something inside her had shifted. The attorney who handled the will had been blunt. The land has some value, but the house itself is worthless. Best to tear it down and sell the property to one of the developers who've been eyeing that stretch of highway. Everyone agreed it was the sensible choice. Yet here she was, standing in front of the ramshackle building, feeling strangely conflicted. Catherine remembered summer afternoons on the wraparound porch, drinking lemonade while Grandma Martha told stories of the farm's heyday. She remembered the smell of apple pies cooling on the windowsill, the creak of the old wooden swing hanging from the oak tree that once stood tall beside the house before lightning claimed it. But those were ghosts of memories from 20 years ago. Now the house was just a dangerous eyesore, a liability waiting to collapse. "You're absolutely sure about this?" The voice came from behind her, where Lucas Rodriguez, the local contractor she'd hired, stood beside his pickup truck. He was studying the structure with professional concern, clipboard in hand. "The foundation's shot, the support beams are rotted through, and there's evidence of black mold throughout. Honestly, Ms. Marshall, restoration would cost 3 times what building a new house would." Catherine nodded, squaring her shoulders. "I'm sure. Tear it down. I've already salvaged what little I wanted to keep." It was practical, logical, exactly the kind of clear-headed decision she prided herself on making. She'd spent the previous weekend photographing what remained of the house and carefully removing the few items worth preserving. Grandma Martha's handmade quilt, some vintage photographs in their original frames, and an antique writing desk that had belonged to her great-grandfather. Lucas made a note on his clipboard. "We'll bring in the equipment tomorrow. Should take about 3 days to demolish and clear the debris. Then you can decide what you want to do with the land." Catherine had already decided. A national home builder had made a reasonable offer, contingent on the land being cleared. They planned to build a small development of starter homes, nothing extravagant, but decent houses for young families. Martha would have liked that idea, Catherine told herself. Her grandmother had always loved having children around. That evening, Catherine stayed in the small motel off the highway, the only accommodation within 20 miles of the farm. She'd taken a week off work to oversee the demolition and finalize the sale, though her presence wasn't strictly necessary. Something about signing away the land without being present felt wrong, disrespectful to her grandmother's memory. As she sat on the stiff motel bed, scrolling through emails on her laptop, her phone rang. The screen showed her sister Elaine's name. Catherine hesitated before answering. They hadn't spoken much since the funeral, when they'd argued about the property. "So you're really going through with it?" Elaine didn't bother with a greeting. Her voice had that familiar edge of judgment that Catherine had grown accustomed to over the years. "Hello to you too," Catherine replied, trying to keep her tone light. "Yes, demolition starts tomorrow. You didn't even try to save it." The accusation hung between them, heavy and familiar. Elaine had always been the sentimental one, clinging to the past while Catherine looked forward. "There's nothing to save, Ellie. You saw the condition it's in. The structural engineer said it's beyond repair. Grandma wanted us to keep it in the family. That house has been in our family for 4 generations. Catherine pinched the bridge of her nose, feeling the beginning of a headache. "Grandma wanted us to be happy. She understood that things change. The farm hasn't been operational in 30 years. The house hasn't been properly maintained in at least 20. It's a miracle it's still standing at all. You always have a logical explanation for everything, don't you?" Elaine's voice cracked slightly. "Some things have value beyond their practical use, Catherine. Some things are worth preserving because of what they mean, what they represent. I took pictures. I saved what I could. The rest is just wood and nails, Ellie." But even as she said it, Catherine felt a twinge of doubt. Was she making a mistake? Was she betraying some unspoken family trust by letting strangers bulldoze Grandma Martha's home? After ending the call with her sister unresolved as always, Catherine found herself unable to sleep. She tossed and turned on the uncomfortable motel mattress, her mind cycling between practical reassurances and nagging doubts. Around 2 a.m., she finally gave up, threw on jeans and a sweatshirt, and drove back to the farmhouse. The night was clear and moonlit, casting the dilapidated structure in silver light that somehow made it look both more majestic and more forlorn. Catherine parked her rental car in the gravel driveway and simply sat there for a while, engine off, staring at the house through the windshield. It seemed to stare back, its broken windows like sad, accusatory eyes. Finally, she stepped out into the cool night air. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl from the distant tree line. Catherine walked slowly around the perimeter of the house, her phone's flashlight illuminating the crumbling foundation, the warped siding, the sagging porch steps. This close, there was no denying how far gone the structure was. It wasn't just cosmetic damage. The house was literally falling apart. When she reached the back of the house, Catherine paused at the kitchen door. She'd avoided going inside during her previous visit, concerned about safety. But something compelled her now, perhaps a desire for one final goodbye, one last chance to feel whatever connection remained to her grandmother in this place. The door was swollen with humidity and took a firm push to open. It creaked ominously, the sound echoing through the empty house. Catherine's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing the kitchen exactly as she remembered, frozen in time except for the layer of dust coating everything. The vintage refrigerator from the 1960s still stood in the corner. The floral wallpaper, though peeling in places, was the same pattern she'd studied as a child while eating breakfast at the small table by the window. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Catherine moved carefully through the kitchen into the living room, mindful of potential hazards. The floorboards groaned beneath her weight, and in places, they felt alarmingly soft. The living room was largely empty. Most of the furniture had been sold or given away years ago when Martha moved to assisted living. But the stone fireplace still dominated one wall, and above it hung the large mirror in its ornate wooden frame that had always fascinated Catherine as a child. It was tarnished now, the silvering deteriorated so that it reflected only distorted shadows. She continued through the downstairs rooms, memories flooding back with each step. The dining room where Thanksgiving dinners had been held, the small study where Grandpa John had kept his books before he passed when Catherine was only 5. Everything was smaller than she remembered, shabbier, yet achingly familiar. At the base of the stairs, Catherine hesitated. The upper floor would be even more dangerous. The roof had been leaking for years, and water damage would have weakened the ceiling and floor joists. But something pulled her upward, perhaps the memory of the room she'd shared with Elaine during those summer visits, with its sloped ceiling and window seat overlooking the eastern fields. She tested each step before putting her full weight on it, wincing at the protesting creaks. Halfway up, she froze as something scurried across the upper landing, probably a raccoon or possum that had taken up residence. Nature was already reclaiming this place, bit by bit. The upstairs hallway was in worse shape than the ground floor. Part of the ceiling had collapsed at one end, leaving a pile of plaster and wooden lath. The door to what had been her grandparents' bedroom was ajar, and Catherine pushed it open slowly, her flashlight beam revealing a nearly empty room. The massive four-poster bed was gone, but the built-in window seat remained, though the cushions had long since been removed. As she crossed to the window, something caught Catherine's attention, a different sound beneath her footsteps. Most of the floor produced the expected creak of old wood, but one section sounded hollow, almost drum-like. She stopped, tapping her foot experimentally. Yes, definitely different. Curious, she knelt down, running her hand over the floorboards. They looked the same as the others, but there was a barely perceptible seam forming a rough square about 3 feet across. Catherine's heart quickened. A trapdoor? Had there always been an access panel to the space between floors, and she just never noticed it as a child? Or was it something else entirely? She traced the seam with her fingertip, looking for a way to lift the panel, but found nothing obvious. After several minutes of searching, she spotted a small knothole in one of the boards that seemed deeper than it should be. On an impulse, she pressed it. There was a soft click, and the panel shifted slightly. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. She worked her fingers into the narrow gap and lifted. The panel came up reluctantly, revealing a small compartment beneath the floor. Inside was a metal box, about the size of a shoebox, covered in dust. With trembling hands, Catherine lifted out the box and set it on the floor beside her. It was surprisingly heavy and secured with a small padlock that had rusted over time. There was no key in sight. She tried to open it anyway, tugging at the lock, but it held firm despite its age. Catherine sat back on her heels, staring at the box in wonderment. What was it? Why had Grandma Martha never mentioned a hidden compartment or a secret box? What could be inside that warranted such concealment? She decided to take the box with her. Whatever it contained, it was part of her family's history, perhaps the last undiscovered piece. Carefully, she made her way back downstairs and out to her car, the metal box cradled against her chest like something precious. Back at the motel, Catherine examined the box more closely under better light. It was made of steel, painted dark green, with no markings or labels. The padlock was a standard design, though an older model. Without the key, she'd need to find another way to open it. She briefly considered driving to the nearest hardware store in the morning to buy bolt cutters, but something made her hesitate. The box had remained hidden for who knew how long. Perhaps it deserved a more respectful approach. Instead, she called Lucas and asked if he knew a locksmith in the area who might be able to open an old padlock without destroying it. To her surprise, he offered to take a look himself. "I've got a knack for locks," he explained when he arrived at her motel room 30 minutes later, carrying a small toolkit. "My grandfather was a locksmith, taught me a few tricks." Catherine watched as Lucas examined the padlock, his hands deft and confident. He tried several small tools from his kit, working with focused precision. After about 10 minutes, there was a satisfying click and the shackle sprung open. "There you go," Lucas said, sitting back with a smile. "No need to break it. These old locks aren't very sophisticated." Catherine thanked him, suddenly feeling protective of the box and whatever secrets it might contain. She waited until he left before lifting the lid, half expecting to find something mundane, old photographs perhaps, or financial documents. What she found instead left her speechless. The box contained several items carefully wrapped in oilcloth. On top was a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, the paper yellowed with age. Beneath these was a small leather-bound journal, its pages brittle and the binding cracked. But it was the final item that made Catherine gasp. A canvas pouch that, when opened, revealed dozens of gold coins. With shaking hands, Catherine carefully removed one of the coins and held it up to the light. It was heavy, the gold gleaming despite a patina of age. On one side was stamped the profile of a woman with the word Liberty above it, and on the reverse an eagle with outstretched wings. Around the edge were the words United States of America and $20. It was a gold double eagle coin. Catherine recognized it from a museum exhibit she'd once seen on American currency. She carefully examined several more coins. They were all the same double eagles with dates ranging from 1907 to 1932. Catherine wasn't an expert, but she knew enough to realize these weren't just currency. They were valuable collector's items. Even at their face value of $20 each, the several dozen coins represented a significant sum for the time they were minted. But their current value would be much, much higher. Setting the coins aside, Catherine turned to the journal. The handwriting on the first page was precise but faded. Property of Joseph Marshall. Commenced January 15th, 1929. Her great-grandfather, Grandma Martha's father. As Catherine began to read, the story that unfolded was both fascinating and troubling. Joseph Marshall had been a banker in the nearby town before the Great Depression hit. The journal detailed how, as the economic crisis worsened and banks began to fail, he grew increasingly concerned about his customers' deposits. The entries became more frantic through 1932, as the local economy collapsed and farmers, his friends and neighbors, faced financial ruin. Then came the entry that made Catherine's heart race. March 3, 1933, just before President Roosevelt declared a bank holiday that would close every bank in the nation. Joseph wrote about his decision to remove certain assets from the bank, specifically the gold coins, with the intention of protecting them from potential confiscation under the upcoming gold recall. He described hiding them at his farm, planning to return them once the crisis passed. But the next entries revealed that Joseph never got the chance. The bank failed during the holiday, and he found himself under investigation. Though nothing could be proven about the missing gold, suspicion fell heavily on him. He wrote of his shame, his fear of being discovered, and his inability to return the coins without admitting to taking them in the first place. The final entry, dated December 24, 1933, was heartbreaking. I took the gold to protect it, to keep it safe for the people who entrusted their savings to me. Now I am trapped by my own good intentions. May God forgive me for what I meant as an act of protection, but became something else entirely. I leave this record and the gold itself to be discovered when I am gone, in hopes that someday, some way, it might find its way to those who rightfully own it. But Joseph hadn't died then. According to family history, he had lived until 1965, carrying his secret to the grave. Grandma Martha had been his only child had she known. The letters might hold the answer. Catherine carefully untied the ribbon and unfolded the first letter. It was from Martha to her father, dated 1966, a year after his death. In it, Martha wrote of finding the journal and the gold coins while clearing out his personal effects. She expressed shock and confusion, unsure of what to do with her discovery. The remaining letters documented Martha's journey as she wrestled with her father's legacy. She had researched the bank's failure and tried to identify the original depositors, but after more than 30 years, the trail had grown cold. Many had died, others had moved away during the Depression, and the bank's records were incomplete. In her final letter, never sent and apparently written to herself, Martha concluded that the best course was to preserve the gold and the truth. leaving them for future generations to resolve. She wrote of hiding the box in a place where it wouldn't be found accidentally, but could be discovered by someone who might know what to do. That someone, it seemed, was Catherine. As dawn broke outside the motel window, Catherine sat surrounded by the contents of the box, her mind racing. What was she supposed to do with this information? With the gold coins that technically belonged to people who had deposited their savings in a bank that failed nearly a century ago. The coins themselves were now worth far more than their original value, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars given their age, condition, and the current price of gold. She thought about the demolition scheduled for today. If she hadn't gone back to the house last night, if she hadn't walked on that specific part of the floor, the secret compartment would have been destroyed along with everything else. The coins would have been buried in rubble, lost forever, or worse, scattered and found by the demolition crew, with no context for what they represented. Was it coincidence that had led her to discover the hidden box on the very last night the house stood intact? Or was it something else, some family connection reaching across time, ensuring that Joseph Marshall's final wishes weren't lost? Catherine picked up her phone and called Lucas. "I need to postpone the demolition," she said without preamble. "Something's come up." As morning light filtered through the thin motel curtains, Catherine placed each item back into the metal box with reverence. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders. This wasn't just about a dilapidated farmhouse anymore. This was about justice, legacy, and perhaps redemption for her great-grandfather Joseph. She made several calls in quick succession, first to Lucas to postpone the demolition indefinitely, then to her boss in Seattle requesting an additional week of leave, and finally to a historian at the county museum who might help her piece together the full story. The historian, Dr. Eleanor Winters, agreed to meet her that afternoon. Family artifacts from the Depression era. "Absolutely, I'd be delighted to take a look," she said, her voice animated with scholarly enthusiasm. "The regional impact of the banking crisis is actually my specialty." Catherine spent the morning researching online, learning what she could about the banking crisis of 1933 and the subsequent gold recall. President Roosevelt's Executive Order 6102 had made it illegal for U.S. citizens to hoard gold coins, requiring them to exchange their gold for paper currency at a fixed rate. The government had been desperate to increase its gold reserves to stabilize the economy. Her great-grandfather's actions, while technically illegal at the time, seemed born of a desire to protect his client's assets rather than to enrich himself. At 2 o'clock, Catherine arrived at the small county museum. Housed in what had once been the town's first schoolhouse, Dr. Winters was waiting at the entrance, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes bright with curiosity behind round spectacles. She led Catherine to a private research room in the back. "Now then," Dr. Winters said once they were settled at a table, "tell me about these artifacts of yours." Catherine hesitated only briefly before opening the metal box. She had debated how much to reveal, but ultimately decided that the historian's expertise was worth the risk of disclosure. As she laid out the journal, letters, and finally, the canvas pouch of gold coins, Dr. Winters' eyes widened. "My goodness," she whispered, gently lifting one of the double eagles with gloved hands. "These are in remarkable condition. And you found them hidden in your grandmother's farmhouse." Catherine nodded, then explained everything: Joseph's position at the bank, his actions before the bank holiday, and Martha's later discovery of the hidden gold. As she spoke, Dr. Winters examined the journal with growing interest. "This is extraordinary," the historian said when Catherine finished. "Not just the coins themselves, though they're certainly valuable from a numismatic perspective, but this first-hand account of a local banker's experience during the crisis. It's an invaluable historical document." "What about the legal implications?" Catherine asked, voicing the concern that had been nagging at her. Technically, this gold was taken from the bank. Even if my great-grandfather's intentions were good, doesn't that make it stolen property? Dr. Winters removed her glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. The legal situation is complex. The bank no longer exists as an entity. Its assets and liabilities would have been resolved during the liquidation process in the 1930s. Depositors would have received whatever percentage of their savings the bank's remaining assets could cover, typically pennies on the dollar. She replaced her glasses and continued, from a strictly legal standpoint, after 90 years, the statute of limitations on any financial crime would have expired long ago. However, there's an ethical dimension that your grandmother clearly recognized, and now you do too. Catherine nodded. I want to do the right thing. These coins were meant to protect people's savings. They should go to the families of the original depositors if possible. A noble sentiment, Dr. Winters smiled, but a challenging task after all this time. Still, we might be able to piece together something of the bank's history. She rose and crossed to a filing cabinet. The Historical Society maintains archives of local businesses, including the banks that operated here. Let me see what we have on Marshall Savings and Loan. The name sent a jolt through Catherine. Marshall? The bank had our family name? Dr. Winters looked up in surprise. You didn't know? Your great-grandfather wasn't just a banker. He founded the institution in 1912. Marshall Savings and Loan was quite successful until the Depression hit. It was considered one of the most stable banks in the county, which made its failure all the more devastating to the community. This new information cast Joseph's actions in an even more poignant light. It hadn't just been a banker trying to protect his clients, it had been a man trying to save the institution that bore his name and the trust of his community. Dr. Winters returned with several folders containing yellowed newspaper clippings, bank statements, and other documents. Together, they began piecing together the story of Marshall Savings and Loan. By closing time, they had compiled a list of the bank's major depositors based on public records and newspaper accounts of the failure. It's incomplete, Dr. Winters cautioned, but it's a starting point. Many of these families are still in the area, although the names may have changed through marriage over the generations. Catherine photographed everything, thanked the historian profusely, and promised to keep her updated on what she discovered. As she drove back to the motel, her mind was racing with possibilities. The demolition was on hold, but what about the house itself? It was still structurally unsound, still a dangerous relic. Yet now it seemed almost sacred, the guardian of a secret kept for nearly a century. Back at the motel, Catherine spread her notes across the bed and began organizing her findings. She created a spreadsheet of the depositors' names they'd identified, along with the approximate amounts they'd lost when the bank failed. If she were to distribute the current value of the gold coins proportionally, she'd need to trace these families and verify their connections to the original depositors. Her phone rang Elaine again. Lucas called me, her sister said without preamble. He said you put the demolition on hold. What's going on? Catherine hesitated, then made a decision. I found something in the house, Ellie, something important. I think you should come see for yourself. There was a long pause. You're serious? Dead serious. Can you fly in tomorrow? Another pause then. I'll be on the first flight I can get. The next morning, Catherine returned to the farmhouse. In daylight, it looked even more decrepit, peeling paint, sagging porch, broken windows like jagged teeth. Yet she viewed it differently now, seeing beyond its decaying exterior to the secrets it had preserved. She walked around the perimeter again, this time with new purpose, wondering what other stories might be embedded in its walls and floors. She ventured inside carefully, heading straight for the master bedroom and the hidden compartment in the floor. Kneeling beside it, she examined the mechanism more closely. The craftsmanship was impressive, the seam almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. The spring-loaded catch triggered by the knothole still functional after all these years. Who had built this? Joseph himself? Or had he commissioned it secretly? Catherine ran her fingers along the edges of the opening, then reached inside, feeling the bottom and sides of the compartment. Her fingers brushed against something in the back corner. A small object that had been overlooked in the darkness of her nighttime discovery. She pulled it out, a small key on a faded ribbon. For a wild moment, she thought it might be the key to the padlock she'd had Lucas open. But no, it was much too small. It looked more like a key to a safety deposit box or a small cabinet. Catherine pocketed it, wondering what lock it might fit, and continued her exploration of the house. She moved methodically from room to room, tapping walls, examining floorboards, looking for any other signs of hidden spaces. In the downstairs study, she found a loose baseboard behind what had once been her grandfather's desk. Prying it away revealed a narrow cavity containing a rolled document tied with string. With trembling fingers, Catherine extracted it. It was a hand-drawn map of the farm, dated 1933, with several locations marked with small X's. In the corner was a note in what she now recognized as Joseph's handwriting, for safekeeping until resolution can be found. Catherine's heart raced. Could there be more hidden caches on the property? She checked her watch. Elaine's flight wouldn't arrive for another 4 hours. She had time to investigate. Using the map and a compass app on her phone, Catherine began exploring the 20 acres surrounding the house. The landscape had changed over the decades. Trees had grown where once there had been open fields, and what had been an orchard was now overgrown with wild vegetation. Still, she was able to identify several landmarks referenced on the map. The first X led her to a lightning-struck oak at the edge of what had once been a cornfield. The massive tree had clearly been dead for years, its bare branches reaching skyward like skeletal fingers. According to the map, something was buried at its base, on the north side. Catherine returned to her car for a small folding shovel she kept in her emergency kit. The ground was hard, but she managed to dig down about 2 feet before her shovel struck something solid. Carefully, she excavated around it, revealing a metal ammunition box similar to the one she'd found in the house, though smaller. Inside was another canvas pouch containing more gold coins. These were smaller than the double eagles, mostly $10 and $5 gold pieces. Beneath them was a handwritten list of names with amounts next to them, titled Widows and Orphans Fund. Joseph had apparently been setting aside money for the neediest members of his community. By the time Catherine had explored 3 of the marked locations and found similar caches, it was nearly time to meet Elaine's flight. She secured her findings in her car and drove to the small regional airport 30 miles away, her mind whirling with implications. Joseph hadn't just taken gold from the bank before it failed. He had systematically hidden it in multiple locations around the property, each cache seemingly designated for specific purposes or people. Elaine was waiting at the curb, a small overnight bag at her feet. She looked tired but curious as she slid into the passenger seat. "This better be good," she said by way of greeting. "I had to reschedule 3 client meetings." "Trust me," Catherine replied. "It's better than good. It changes everything." On the drive back, Catherine explained her discoveries, watching her sister's expression shift from skepticism to astonishment. "So the house," Elaine began, "is staying right where it is," Catherine finished firmly. "At least until we figure out what to do about all this." They spent the rest of the day examining the materials Catherine had gathered, the journal, the letters, the map, and the various caches of gold coins. Elaine, who worked as a genealogist, immediately recognized the potential for tracing the descendants of the bank's depositors. "This is what I do, Kath," she said, excitement lighting her features. "Finding people, connecting family lines. With the names we have and the county records, we should be able to locate many of the descendants." As evening approached, they returned to the farmhouse together. Catherine watched as Elaine walked through the rooms, touching walls and doorframes with a reverence she hadn't shown at their grandmother's funeral. "It's strange," Elaine said softly. "All these years, I wanted to preserve this place because of my memories here. I never imagined it was actually preserving something for us." "I've been thinking," Catherine said, leaning against the doorframe of the study. "What if we don't sell the land after all? What if we rebuild?" Elaine looked up sharply. "Rebuild? You mean a new house?" Catherine shook her head. "No, I mean restore this one. Properly, from the foundation up. But you said yourself it's beyond repair." "Structurally, yes. But we could salvage what we can. The original woodwork, the fireplace, even some of the floorboards. Then rebuild everything else to match the original design." Catherine grew animated as she spoke, her architect's mind already sketching possibilities. "We could make it a heritage site, Ellie, a museum dedicated to the Great Depression's impact on rural communities, with Joseph's story as its centerpiece." Elaine's expression softened. "You'd give up your life in Seattle for this?" "Not give up," Catherine corrected. "Expand. I could work remotely most of the time, travel back for important meetings. The firm has been pushing for more sustainable historic preservation projects anyway. This could be a showcase piece." They stayed up late that night at the motel, planning and dreaming like they hadn't done since they were girls sharing that upstairs bedroom during summer visits. The gold coins presented both an opportunity and a challenge. Their current market value, especially considering their historical significance and excellent condition, would likely exceed $1 million, more than enough to fund the restoration of the farmhouse and establish the museum. But both sisters agreed with their grandmother's assessment. The gold rightfully belonged to the families who had entrusted their savings to Joseph Marshall. They would need to find these descendants and make restitution, even after all these years. The next morning, they met with Lucas to explain the change in plans. Instead of demolition, they wanted a complete structural assessment to determine what could be salvaged and what would need to be rebuilt. Lucas scratched his head as they outlined their vision. "It's ambitious," he said, "but not impossible. I know some specialists in historical restoration who could consult." He paused, studying the exterior of the house. "You know, my great-grandfather used to talk about your family. He always said Joseph Marshall was the most honest man in the county, that the bank failure broke his heart more than anyone else's. Would your great-grandfather have been alive during the Depression?" Elaine asked, suddenly alert. "Oh yes, he was in his 20s. Worked as a carpenter back then. Actually, I think he might have done some work on this house at one point." Catherine and Elaine exchanged meaningful glances. Could Lucas's great-grandfather have built the hidden compartments for Joseph? As they discussed the possibilities, Catherine's phone rang Dr. Winters from the museum, calling with excitement in her voice. "I've found something you need to see," the historian said. The Historical Society has a sealed packet in its archives, left by Joseph Marshall in 1965, with instructions that it be opened only by a direct descendant if certain conditions were met. One of those conditions was the discovery of, and I quote, "assets secured for safekeeping during the banking emergency of 1933. Catherine's hand tightened on the phone. "We'll be right there." At the museum, Dr. Winters presented them with a large manila envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with wax and pressed with what appeared to be a signet ring. Written across the front in faded ink was, "To be opened only by a direct descendant of Joseph Marshall upon discovery of the secured assets." As the county historian, I've been aware of this packet for years, Dr. Winters explained, but without the specified conditions being met, I was bound by the terms of the bequest to keep it sealed. With trembling fingers, Catherine broke the wax seal and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a thick sheaf of papers, bank records, it appeared, meticulously preserved. A letter rested on top, addressed to my descendants. Catherine read it aloud. "If you are reading this, then you have discovered what I was forced to conceal. In the final days before the banking holiday of 1933, as panic spread and a run on the bank seemed imminent, I made a decision that has haunted me ever since. I removed certain assets, specifically gold coinage, from the bank's reserves with the intention of protecting them from the looming government recall and potential devaluation. My actions, while technically unlawful, were never meant for personal gain. Rather, I sought to preserve what I could of my customers' hard-earned savings. These were not wealthy investors, but farmers, shopkeepers, widows, and laborers, people who trusted Marshall's savings and loan with their life's work. When the bank was forced to close and liquidation began, I found myself trapped by my own actions. To return the gold would mean admitting to its removal, an admission that would likely result in criminal charges and certainly in the immediate confiscation of the gold itself under executive order 6102. So I made another choice to hide the gold until such time as it could be rightfully returned to those who had entrusted their savings to my care. Enclosed with this letter is a complete ledger of all accounts as they stood on March 3, 1933, along with the proportion of gold I was able to secure for each. It has been the burden and shame of my life that I was never able to fulfill my intention of returning these funds. Perhaps you, with the distance of time and without the legal constraints that bound me, can succeed where I failed. If so, you will have my eternal gratitude and, I hope, release my soul from the weight of this unresolved obligation. With deepest regret and highest hopes, Joseph Marshall, December 18, 1965. When Catherine finished reading, there was silence in the room. She looked up to find both Elaine and Dr. Winters with tears in their eyes. "He wasn't a thief," Elaine whispered. "He was trying to save what he could." "And now," Catherine said, looking at the detailed ledger Joseph had preserved, "we can finish what he started." The following weeks transformed Catherine and Elaine's lives in ways neither could have imagined. With Joseph's detailed ledger as their guide, they embarked on what Elaine dubbed the Redemption Project, tracking down the descendants of Marshall, savings and loans depositors, to return what their ancestors had lost. With interest paid in the form of history itself, they converted their motel room into a makeshift command center. Walls covered with family trees and maps dotted with colorful pins, representing each family they'd traced. Dr. Winters proved an invaluable ally, providing access to local historical records and introducing them to elderly residents whose memories stretched back to the Depression era. Lucas, too, became an essential part of their team, not only assessing the farmhouse for restoration, but also connecting them with his extended family, many of whom had stories about Joseph Marshall and the bank failure that had shaped the community. "My grandmother used to say that when the bank closed, it was like the heart was ripped out of the town," Lucas told them one evening as they shared dinner at the local diner. "People lost more than money, they lost faith. But she always insisted that Joseph Marshall was a good man caught in an impossible situation." The gold coins themselves had been carefully cataloged and secured in a safe deposit box at the regional bank, a irony not lost on the sisters. A reputable coin appraiser had confirmed what they already suspected. The collection was worth significantly more than its weight in gold, due to the numismatic value of the rare and well-preserved coins. The 1927 double eagles alone are worth over $250,000 each in this condition, the appraiser had told them, his voice reverent. "And you have 3 of them. The entire collection could fetch well over $2 million at auction." But selling the coins was never their intention. Each piece represented a portion of someone's life savings, hopes for a child's education, dreams of expansion for a family farm, security for old age. Each had been entrusted to Joseph Marshall and would now, through his great-granddaughters, find its way home. Their first successful trace came in the form of the Wilkins family. According to Joseph's ledger, Thomas Wilkins had been a dairy farmer with $1,200 on deposit when the bank failed, a substantial sum in 1933, through census records, obituaries, and local church registries. Elaine tracked his lineage to a grandson, Robert Wilkins, now in his 70s and living just 50 miles away in the state capital. Catherine called him, heart-pounding as she explained who she was and why she wanted to meet. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Marshall," he finally said, the name heavy with recognition. "My grandfather talked about that bank until the day he died. Said losing his savings there set our family back 20 years. That's exactly why we want to meet," Catherine replied, her throat tight. "To make it right." The meeting took place at a quiet cafe. Robert Wilkins was tall and weathered, with the calloused hands of someone who had worked the land despite his pressed shirt and polished shoes. His eyes, sharp under bushy white brows, studied Catherine and Elaine with cautious curiosity as they explained their discovery. When they placed 3 double eagle coins on the table, the equivalent of Thomas Wilkins's deposit, Robert's hands trembled as he picked one up. "My grandfather had a pocket watch with a gold coin set into the case," he said softly. "Said it was the only gold he had left after the crash. I always wondered what happened to it after he passed." He looked up at the sisters, eyes bright with unshed tears. "This means more than you know. Not just the value, though that's considerable, but the fact that your family kept faith all these years." As Catherine and Elaine shared the full story, Joseph's journal, Martha's decision, their own discovery, Robert listened with growing wonder. When they finished, he sat back and shook his head. "All my life, I've heard that bank failures were caused by greedy bankers looking out for themselves. To learn that your great-grandfather was trying to protect his customers, even at risk to himself." He reached across the table and clasped their hands. "Thank you for this. For all of it. You've restored something my family lost generations ago, and I don't mean the money. That first success fueled their determination. Each family they found had a similar story of hardship following the bank's closure, of opportunities lost, of bitterness gradually replaced by resignation. And each meeting brought the same transformation: initial skepticism giving way to astonishment, then to a profound gratitude that transcended the monetary value of what was being returned. Not every search ended in success. Some family lines had died out, others had moved away without leaving traces, and a few simply couldn't be tracked with certainty. For these unclaimed portions, Catherine and Elaine established a trust fund dedicated to educational scholarships for local students, honoring Joseph's evident concern for the community's future. As word of their project spread through the small community, more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Elderly residents came forward with memories and memorabilia, filling in gaps in their understanding of Joseph Marshall and the impact of the bank's failure. One woman brought a ledger book her father had kept, showing payments Joseph had made to their family in the years after the bank closed, small amounts delivered quietly, with no explanation beyond partial settlement. "Dad always said Marshall was paying out of his own pocket," the woman explained. "That he lived simply so he could try to make good on what people had lost." This aligned with what they had learned about their great-grandfather's life after the bank failure. Though he had remained in the community, respected as a former banker and financial advisor, he had never again accumulated wealth or property beyond the farmhouse and its surrounding acres. The gold had remained hidden, his secret atonement preserved for future generations to complete. While Elaine focused on the genealogical research, Catherine threw herself into plans for restoring the farmhouse. The structural assessment confirmed what they already knew: the foundation was compromised. Support beams had rotted, and much of the framework would need to be replaced. But key elements could be salvaged: the stone fireplace, the ornate woodwork around doors and windows, sections of the original hardwood flooring, and of course, the hidden compartments that had protected Joseph's secret for decades. We'll need to document everything before we start dismantling, Catherine explained to the historical preservation expert she'd brought in from Seattle. Every hidden space, every concealed drawer or compartment. They're not just architectural features, they're parts of the story. The expert, Dr. Renata Vasquez, walked through the house with growing excitement. "This is extraordinary," she said, examining one of the hidden caches Catherine had discovered behind a false wall in the pantry. Depression-era hiding places aren't uncommon. People distrusted banks after so many failures, but this systematic approach and the craftsmanship involved, it's museum quality. With Dr. Vasquez's endorsement, Catherine submitted an application to have the property listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The Marshall Farmhouse and Bank Failure Museum would preserve not just Joseph's story, but the larger narrative of how the Great Depression had reshaped rural America. The projected costs of restoration were daunting, nearly $750,000, for a complete renovation that would preserve historical elements while making the structure sound and accessible to the public. But an unexpected source of funding emerged when Dr. Winters connected them with the State Historical Society, which offered matching grants for significant preservation projects. "Your great-grandfather's story has captured imaginations at the state level," Dr. Winters told them. "It's not just about banking history or the Depression, it's about integrity, about someone trying to do right in impossible circumstances." That resonates with people. It resonated beyond the historical community as well. When a regional newspaper ran a feature on the Marshall sisters and their quest to fulfill their great-grandfather's promise, donations began arriving from across the state. Former residents who had grown up hearing stories about the bank failure, history enthusiasts touched by Joseph's ethical struggle, and even a few descendants of bank customers who couldn't be located but had learned of the project all contributed what they could to help preserve this piece of American history. 6 weeks into the project, Catherine and Elaine had successfully traced and met with the descendants of 14 original depositors, returning gold coins proportional to their ancestors' deposits, along with copies of Joseph's records. Each meeting became a small ceremony of reconciliation, healing wounds that had been passed down through generations. The most poignant of these encounters came when they located the descendants of Edward Jenkins, who, according to Joseph's ledger, had been the bank's largest depositor. With nearly $18,000 on deposit when the doors closed, a fortune in 1933, the Jenkins family had been prominent landowners, their farm sprawling across hundreds of acres of prime agricultural land. Following the bank's failure, local legend held that Edward Jenkins had lost everything, eventually taking his own life out of despair. His widow and children had left the area shortly after, their subsequent history unknown until Elaine's persistent research led to a granddaughter, Patricia Jenkins Montgomery, now living in Colorado. When they called Patricia to explain, her reaction was unexpected. "I've been waiting for this call my entire life," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "though I never knew exactly what form it would take." When they met in person at the farmhouse, Patricia, having flown in specifically for the occasion, she brought with her a small leather suitcase that had belonged to her grandmother, Sarah Jenkins. Inside were dozens of letters exchanged between Joseph Marshall and Sarah in the years after Edward's death. "My grandmother never believed that Joseph Marshall was responsible for what happened to our family," Patricia explained as they sat at a makeshift table in what had once been the farmhouse dining room. "These letters show they were actually working together, trying to find ways to recover what was lost." The correspondence revealed a side of Joseph they hadn't yet seen, his tireless efforts behind the scenes to help the families most devastated by the bank's closure. He had connected Sarah Jenkins with investors willing to buy portions of the family's land at fair prices rather than the fire sale values prevalent after the crash. He had found positions for the Jenkins children in stable businesses, ensuring they received education and opportunities despite their reduced circumstances. Most surprisingly, several letters referenced the safeguarded portion and assets held in trust, clear allusions to the hidden gold. Sarah Jenkins had known, at least in part, what Joseph had done. My grandmother told me once that Mr. Marshall had saved something from the bank for our family, Patricia said. That someday it would come back to us when the time was right. I thought it was just a story to comfort a child, but she made me promise to keep any papers she left behind. She smiled, eyes bright with unshed tears. She knew this day would come. She kept faith with Joseph Marshall, just as he kept faith with her. The Marshall sisters returned to the Jenkins family their proportional share of the recovered gold coins, now worth over $400,000. But more valuable than the gold was the restoration of their family's history. The knowledge that their grandfather had not been abandoned in his darkest hour, but supported by the very man who might have been blamed for his losses. As summer turned to early fall, the redemption project gained momentum. Local contractors, inspired by the story, offered discounted services for the farmhouse restoration. A tech company specializing in historical exhibitions donated an interactive display system that would allow museum visitors to explore the banking crisis through personal stories, including Joseph's own words from his journal. Catherine took a leave of absence from her firm in Seattle, then made the decision that had been forming in her mind for weeks. She would relocate permanently, opening a small branch office of her architectural firm specializing in historical preservation. The farmhouse would become both museum and living laboratory, demonstrating how historic structures could be sensitively adapted for modern use while honoring their past. Elaine, too, found her professional life transformed by the project. Her genealogical skills, previously employed primarily for wealthy clients seeking to burnish family trees, now had deeper purpose. She began developing a workshop series on redemptive genealogy, using family history research to heal historical wounds and reconnect fragmented communities. One morning in late September, as golden light filtered through the trees surrounding the farmhouse, the sisters stood on the newly reinforced porch, watching as workers carefully removed sections of the original siding, numbering each piece for later restoration. "Did you ever imagine this is where we'd end up when you inherited the place?" Elaine asked, linking her arm through Catherine's. Catherine shook her head. "I was so certain the practical choice was to tear it down and move on. I couldn't see beyond the decay to what it was protecting." She gestured toward the construction activity. "But now I understand why Grandma Martha kept it all these years, even when it started falling apart. She was guarding more than a house, she was guarding the possibility of redemption." "Do you think Joseph ever imagined this outcome?" Elaine mused. "That his great-granddaughters would complete what he started?" "I think he hoped," Catherine replied. "That's why he left the journal, the map, the ledger breadcrumbs for someone to follow. He couldn't know who or when, but he created the possibility." She squeezed her sister's arm. "That's what I find most inspiring in all this. He never gave up on the idea that somehow, things could be made right." As they watched, Lucas emerged from inside the house, carefully carrying what appeared to be a small metal container. His expression was one of barely contained excitement. "You're going to want to see this," he called to them. "We just found it behind the fireplace mantel. Looks like another cache." Catherine and Elaine exchanged glances, joy, anticipation, and wonder mingling in their shared smile. The house had not yet revealed all its secrets. Joseph Marshall's legacy continued to unfold, guiding them toward completion of a promise made nearly a century before, proving that integrity, once planted, could bear fruit across generations. They stepped forward together to receive this new piece of their family's history, united in purpose as they had not been since childhood summers spent beneath this very roof that no longer represented decay and difficult choices but renewal and the profound satisfaction of setting right an ancient wrong. "Let's see what Grandpa Joseph left for us to find next," Catherine said softly. "Another piece of the puzzle, another family to make whole." As Lucas placed the container in her hands, a small tin box with "For the Future" inscribed on its lid, Catherine felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The practical architect who had arrived to tear down a worthless farmhouse had discovered something no spreadsheet could quantify: the value of honoring the past while building toward a more just future. In the weight of that small box, she felt the weight of responsibility, but also the lightness of purpose that comes from walking a path aligned with one's deepest values. Whatever this new discovery held, they would face it together, continuing the work that Joseph had begun, not just restoring a house or returning gold coins, but mending the very fabric of trust that had been torn so long ago. The small tin box revealed yet another dimension of Joseph Marshall's foresight. Inside was a collection of personal items: a signet ring bearing the Marshall family crest, a pocket watch still keeping perfect time, and most intriguingly, a series of hand-drawn architectural plans. These weren't for the farmhouse itself, but for something much more ambitious: a community center Joseph had envisioned for the town, designed to house financial education resources, meeting spaces for local farmers to discuss cooperative ventures, and even a small lending library. He was planning for the community's future, even while trying to make amends for the past, Catherine marveled, carefully unfolding the brittle papers across the makeshift work table they'd set up in the yard. Look at the date: 1940, 7 years after the bank failure. In the midst of continued economic hardship, he was designing a place that would help prevent similar disasters. Accompanying the plans was a handwritten proposal outlining a financial literacy program focused specifically on helping rural families understand banking, investments, and economic cycles. Joseph had noted in the margins, "Knowledge is the best protection against both reckless speculation and paralyzing fear. Our community's children must understand what we did not." This discovery crystallized the final element of what the museum would become. Beyond preserving the story of the bank failure and Joseph's efforts at redemption, it would continue his unfinished work, becoming a center for financial education and community resilience in rural America. With renewed purpose, Catherine revised the restoration plans, incorporating elements of Joseph's community center design into the expanded project. The original farmhouse would house the historical exhibits, while a new adjoining structure, built to complement the historic architecture, would provide space for workshops, classes, and community gatherings. As word of the project spread beyond local borders, unexpected allies emerged. A National Financial Literacy Foundation offered a substantial grant to fund educational programming. A prominent economist who had grown up in a rural community similar to theirs volunteered to help develop curriculum materials specifically tailored to agricultural communities and small-town economies. Most surprisingly, representatives from several major banks contacted them, expressing interest in supporting the museum as part of their corporate social responsibility initiatives. The irony wasn't lost on Catherine and Elaine. Modern banking institutions funding a museum centered around a historic bank failure, but it reflected a growing recognition within the industry of the importance of rebuilding trust with communities that had historical reasons to be skeptical of financial institutions. "We'd like to establish a scholarship program for local students pursuing careers in ethical banking and community-focused finance," explained the regional director of one such bank during a site visit. "Your great-grandfather's story resonates with our mission to be a positive force in the communities we serve." By early winter, the framework of the restored farmhouse was taking shape. The original structure had been carefully dismantled, its usable components preserved, while a new foundation and support structure were built to modern standards. Now original siding was being reattached to the frame, with historically accurate replacements filling in where the old materials couldn't be salvaged. On a crisp December morning, almost exactly 92 years after, Joseph had first hidden the gold. Catherine stood in what would become the main exhibition space, reviewing plans with the museum's newly hired director, Dr. Maya Johnson, a specialist in Depression-era economic history. "We'll want to make the visitor experience immersive," Dr. Johnson was saying, gesturing around the space. "Start with the optimism of the 1920s, then the mounting pressures on rural banks, the difficult choices faced by local bankers like your great-grandfather." She was interrupted by Lucas calling from upstairs. "Catherine, you need to see this." They rushed up to find Lucas kneeling in what had been Martha's bedroom, pointing to a section of flooring they were replacing. "Look at this joist. See how it's different from the others? It's not original to the house." Catherine examined the beam he indicated. Unlike the rough-hewn oak of the original construction, this piece was more precisely milled and appeared to be a slightly different type of wood. "Replacement during a past repair?" "That's what I thought at first," Lucas said. "But look at the date carved here." He pointed to barely visible numbers on the underside. July 14th, 65. July 1965. Catherine breathed. "Just months before Joseph died. And there's more." Lucas pointed to a small metal container affixed to the joist's underside, painted to match the wood and nearly invisible unless you were looking directly at it. I almost missed it entirely. With careful hands, Catherine detached the container, a small metal tube such as might hold blueprints or documents. Inside was a rolled paper secured with a faded ribbon. Her hands trembled slightly as she untied it. It was a letter, the handwriting distinctly Joseph's, but shakier than in his journal entries, showing his advancing age when it was written. "To whoever finds this, I pray it will be family. Though I have no right to expect the discovery of all I have hidden. As my life draws to its close, I find myself reflecting on choices made and unmade. The gold you have presumably found by now represents my failure, my inability to protect my customers' assets while honoring the laws of my country. In hiding it rather than returning or surrendering it, I chose a middle path that satisfied neither law nor conscience fully. Yet there is another treasure I wish to pass on, one of greater value than gold coins, though less easily measured. Throughout my life after the bank's failure, I have collected wisdom about financial resilience, community interdependence, and the delicate balance between prosperity and purpose. These lessons, hard-won through devastating failure and patient rebuilding, may be of use to future generations. In the floorboards of the attic, beneath the southeast dormer window, you will find my life's true work: 30 years of observations, case studies, and practical guidance for rural communities navigating economic uncertainty. It is my hope that these materials might form the foundation for something constructive to rise from the ashes of my greatest regret. With this, I complete my accounting, though the ledger will never fully balance. May whoever reads these words find in them not just the record of a mistake, but the promise of redemption through persistent, humble service to those who were harmed. Joseph Marshall. In my final season. The attic space Joseph described had been partially damaged by roof leaks over the years, but the area beneath the dormer window had remained relatively protected. There, behind a panel so seamlessly integrated into the architecture that it had escaped notice during the initial inspection, they found a wooden crate containing dozens of leather-bound journals, carefully organized by date and topic. Each documented some aspect of rural economic life in the decades following the Depression, farmers' cooperative ventures that had succeeded and failed, community credit systems that had helped families avoid foreclosure during lean years, educational initiatives that had equipped younger generations with financial knowledge their parents lacked. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Johnson whispered as they carefully examined the materials. A first-hand chronicle of rural America's economic evolution through the mid-20th century, written by someone intimately familiar with both banking and farming communities. There are economic historians who would give anything for this level of detailed observation. The discovery of Joseph's life's true work transformed their understanding of the museum's potential impact. Beyond commemorating a historical event or celebrating one man's attempt at redemption, it could offer practical wisdom for contemporary rural communities facing their own economic challenges. He wasn't just trying to make amends for the past, Elaine realized. He was trying to build a better future, one where communities would have the knowledge to protect themselves from financial devastation. In the months that followed, as restoration of the farmhouse neared completion, Catherine and Elaine immersed themselves in Joseph's journals, working with Dr. Johnson and a team of economic historians to distill his observations into educational materials for the museum's programs. What emerged was a philosophy of community resilience that felt surprisingly relevant to modern challenges: diversification of local economies, cooperative resource sharing during difficult times, financial education beginning in childhood, and perhaps most importantly, the cultivation of trust and transparency between financial institutions and the communities they served. Spring arrived, bringing with it the final stages of the museum project. The restored farmhouse stood proud against the awakening landscape, its white clapboard siding gleaming in the sunshine, its wraparound porch rebuilt to exact historical specifications. Inside, exhibits were taking shape, interactive displays that would tell not just Joseph's story, but the larger narrative of how communities withstand economic shocks and rebuild from devastation. Adjacent to the farmhouse, the new community center wing neared completion, its design echoing Joseph's original vision while incorporating modern educational technology. Here, workshops would be held on financial literacy, sustainable agriculture, and community economic development, continuing Joseph's work for new generations. As the project approached its conclusion, Catherine found herself spending more time at the site, often sitting on the reconstructed porch in the evenings, watching sunset paint the same views her great-grandfather had contemplated during his troubled reflections. One such evening, Elaine joined her, bringing 2 glasses and a bottle of their grandmother's favorite blackberry wine, made from a family recipe dating back generations. "To think we almost tore this all down," Elaine said, handing Catherine a glass. Catherine nodded, gazing across the property that had transformed from an inherited burden into a mission. "I was so certain I knew what value was, what was worth preserving, and what wasn't. I thought I was being practical." "You were," Elaine assured her, "just with incomplete information. That's the thing about value, it's not always visible on the surface." They sipped their wine in companionable silence as twilight deepened around them. In the distance, lights from town twinkled on one by one. "Do you think we found everything?" Elaine asked eventually. "All of Joseph's hidden treasures?" Catherine smiled. "I doubt it. I think he designed this place as a puzzle that keeps revealing itself to those who look closely enough. But maybe that's the point, that discovering value requires attention, patience, and care." The grand opening of the Marshall Family Museum of Rural Economic Resilience was scheduled for July 4th, Independence Day, a deliberate choice to emphasize the connection between economic and civic strength. As preparations for the ceremony reached their final stages, one last piece of the puzzle fell into place. Patricia Jenkins Montgomery, granddaughter of the bank's largest depositor, contacted them with unexpected news. While organizing her late mother's estate, she had discovered correspondence between Sarah Jenkins and Martha Marshall, Joseph's daughter, and Catherine and Elaine's grandmother, dating from the 1970s. "It seems our grandmothers were in communication about the gold and Joseph's attempts at redemption," Patricia explained when she arrived with the letters. Martha confided in Sarah about the hidden caches around the property, and Sarah encouraged her to preserve everything until the right time came. Most remarkably, the final letter in the collection, dated just months before Martha's death, contained her explicit wish that Catherine inherit the farmhouse. "Catherine has the practical mind to solve the puzzle Joseph left behind," and the heart to understand why it matters. When the time comes, the property must pass to her. She knew, Catherine whispered, tears welling as she read her grandmother's words. All those years she let me think she was just being sentimental about an old house, but she was protecting Joseph's legacy, waiting for the right moment to pass it on. And she chose you, Elaine said without a trace of jealousy, squeezing her sister's hand. She saw something in you that connected to Joseph's spirit, that practical determination combined with deep integrity. The museum's opening ceremony drew hundreds of attendees, descendants of original bank depositors, community members, historians, economists, even representatives from the Federal Reserve, interested in the historical perspective on banking regulations. As Catherine stood at the podium to deliver the opening remarks, she looked out at the gathered faces and felt the weight of Joseph's journey settle into its final balanced form. Nearly a century ago, my great-grandfather Joseph Marshall faced an impossible choice during the darkest days of the banking crisis, she began. The decisions he made that day set in motion a story that continues to unfold even now, a story not just about financial loss and hidden gold, but about the true meaning of value, integrity, and community resilience. As she spoke, Catherine saw heads nodding, felt the collective recognition of a truth that transcended one family's history to touch on universal human experiences, the struggle to do right in imperfect circumstances, the yearning to make amends for past failures, the hope that future generations might learn from both our triumphs and our mistakes. This museum stands as testament to Joseph Marshall's belief that redemption is always possible, that it's never too late to make things right, even if that task must pass to those who come after us. More importantly, it embodies his conviction that communities can learn to weather economic storms by building knowledge, transparency, and mutual support. After the ceremony, as visitors explored the exhibits and participated in the opening day workshops, Catherine found a quiet moment to visit the special room they'd created to house Joseph's original journals. Here, researchers could study his detailed observations, and visitors could view selections of his writings through glass display cases. In the center of the room stood a small pedestal with the original metal box that had started their journey, the first cache of gold coins. Catherine had discovered that fateful night when she'd returned to the Farmhouse one last time before demolition, now empty of its valuable contents, which had been returned to their rightful owner's descendants. The box itself had become a symbol more precious than anything it had contained. Catherine placed her hand on the box, feeling a connection across time to the troubled banker who had hidden it with such care and hope. "We finished what you started, great-grandfather," she murmured. "The ledger is balanced at last." That evening, as the last visitors departed and the museum staff began preparing for the next day's programs, Catherine and Elaine sat once more on the farmhouse porch, watching fireflies emerge in the summer twilight. "So," Elaine said, "what's next for the architect who saved a worthless farmhouse?" Catherine smiled, gazing out at the landscape that had become her home. The property that she had once viewed as a liability to be disposed of had transformed into the center of a new purpose, one that honored the past while building toward a more resilient future. "I'm thinking about Joseph's community resilience models," she replied. "There are agricultural communities all across the country facing economic challenges similar to what this region experienced during the Depression. What if we could adapt his approaches for contemporary issues, help them develop infrastructure that builds both financial and social capital?" Elaine nodded, her expression thoughtful. "The Marshall Method for Community Resilience. I like it. Not just preserving history, but putting its lessons to work." As darkness settled fully over the land that had sheltered Joseph's secrets for so many decades, Catherine felt a profound sense of rightness. The journey that had begun with a reluctant inheritance and a scheduled demolition had evolved into something neither she nor Joseph could have fully imagined: a redemption. Not just for one man's difficult choice, but for an entire community's relationship with its past. What had appeared worthless had revealed itself as invaluable. What had seemed beyond repair had been restored to new purpose. The old farmhouse that had once symbolized decay now stood as a beacon of renewal, its hidden treasures finally fulfilling their intended purpose, not as hoarded wealth, but as catalysts for healing and growth. In that moment, Catherine understood the true inheritance Joseph Marshall had left behind, not gold coins or property, but the courage to face difficult truths, the persistence to make amends across generations, and the vision to transform failure into foundation for a better future. These were treasures no economic crisis could devalue, no demolition could destroy. As the sisters sat in contented silence, the restored farmhouse stood solid behind them, its lights glowing warmly against the night sky, no longer a burden to be disposed of, but a legacy redeemed and renewed, ready to serve new generations seeking wisdom in troubled times. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.